Picture yourself standing in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning. The fluorescent lights hum above you. A doctor you've never met walks toward you with that particular slowness that people use when the news is already too heavy to carry quickly. You already know before a single word leaves his mouth. You know the way animals know a storm is coming hours before the clouds arrive. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you stood in that corridor yourself. Or maybe you sat in a pew and stared at a wooden box and tried to understand how something as vast as a person could be reduced to that. Maybe you drove home alone afterward and sat in your driveway for 40 minutes because you weren't ready to walk into a house that now had a different shape to it. And maybe, in the quiet of that car, you asked the question that every grieving person eventually asks in the language that has no comfortable translation. Is that it? Is that really all there is? I'm Miriam Elspeth Crane. I'm 70 years old, born in a small coastal town in Oregon that most maps barely bother to name. I spent 32 years as a marine biologist, retired 8 years ago, and have lived since then in a yellow house on a hill with a dog named Ptolemy and more books than shelves to hold them. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I am not given to visions or to mysticism. I spent my career measuring things, cataloging things, insisting on evidence before drawing conclusions. Which is exactly why what happened to me 7 months ago is so difficult to explain, and exactly why I cannot stop explaining it. On a Tuesday morning in late autumn, my heart stopped. Not metaphorically, not in the poetic sense people use when they describe heartbreak. My heart stopped beating for 11 minutes and 43 seconds in the parking lot of a grocery store 3 miles from my house, and when it started again, I brought something back with me. I brought back a conversation with Jesus Christ and what he told me about family, about whether we find each other again, about who waits and who doesn't, about what love actually costs. Some of it is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, and some of it terrified me in a way I'm still processing every single morning when I wake up. But he told me to tell people. He was specific about that. So here I am. Before I tell you what I saw, let me tell you what I had lost. Because the weight of those losses is the only way to understand why the answers mattered so much to me. My mother, Theodora, died when I was 31. She was 58 years old and had spent the final 2 years of her life fighting a lung disease that had no interest in being fought. She was a librarian who read 6 books a week and laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, and made the best lentil soup in any kitchen I have ever entered. When she died, I felt a cavity open in my chest that I simply learned to live around, the way a tree grows around a wound in its bark. I never stopped wondering if she was somewhere, or if she was simply nowhere, which is a completely different and far more terrible thing. My older brother Caius died at 44. Accident on a mountain he had climbed a dozen times before. One wrong foothold on a trail he knew by memory. He was the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down, and who could fix anything mechanical, and who called me every Sunday regardless of what else was happening in his life. We had been close in the way that only siblings who genuinely like each other manage to be close. I missed him like a phantom limb, constantly, and with a particular shock every time I forgot and then remembered again. My husband Aldrich left the world 4 years ago. We had built 41 years together, which sounds like an accomplishment until you realize it means 41 years of learning someone's rhythms, their silences, the specific way they stir their coffee, and the particular sound of their breathing in the dark. And then having all of it simply stop. Aldrich was a quiet man who felt things deeply and showed it rarely except with me. He used to leave small notes in unexpected places, tucked into the book I was reading, folded into my coat pocket, placed beneath my coffee cup in the morning. After he died, I found them for years, still find them sometimes, in the pockets of old jackets, fallen behind drawer liners, each one a small ambush of grief. I had spent 40 years as a scientist, insisting that I didn't know what happened after death because no data existed that could tell me with certainty. But in the private hours, in the part of my mind that runs beneath the professional language, I was terrified that the answer was nothing, that Theodora was nothing, and Caius was nothing, and Aldrich was nothing, and that love was a neurological event that ended with the neurology. 7 months ago, I found out I was wrong. The morning it happened, I had gone to buy coffee and a specific brand of crackers that Ptolemy likes as a treat. I remember this with the strange precision that the brain applies to ordinary moments before catastrophe. I was walking back to my car with 2 paper bags when I felt a pressure in my sternum that I initially mistook for indigestion. Then my left arm went strange, not painful, just absent somehow, like the signal between my brain and my arm had been interrupted. I sat down on the curb next to my car because my legs made that decision without consulting me. A woman named, I later learned, Gertrude, was walking to her own car nearby. She told me afterward that I looked confused and gray, that she almost kept walking because she didn't want to intrude, that something made her stop. She called emergency services. She stayed with me. She held my hand when I lost consciousness, which is a kindness I think about often. I did not feel myself leave. One moment I was on a curb in a parking lot. The next moment I was somewhere else entirely. The first thing I noticed was the light. And I want to be careful here because I spent decades being precise about language. This was not light the way a lamp makes light. This was not even light the way the sun makes light. It was something that light is a very poor translation of, a substance that was simultaneously illumination and warmth and presence and recognition. It knew me. I know how that sounds. It knew me. I was moving through it, not walking, being moved gently, the way a current carries something without that something needing to do anything. And then I saw my mother. She was standing at what I can only describe as a threshold, though there was no visible boundary, only a change in the quality of the space. She looked the way she had looked when I was a child, younger than she was when she died, healthier than she was in her final years, with the particular brightness in her eyes that her illness had slowly extinguished. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen in nearly 40 years, complete, uncomplicated joy. She didn't speak with her mouth, but I heard her perfectly. "Not yet," she said. "Not your turn yet, Miri." Only she called me Miri, only her. I was pulled forward, deeper into the light, and I understood that I was going somewhere specific, that this was not an accident or a wandering, that someone was waiting. When I arrived, and I have no better word for it, I was standing in a space that suggested landscape without insisting on it, rolling and open and suffused with a quality of air that I wanted to breathe forever. And he was there. I will not pretend I recognized him from paintings, because paintings do very little justice to the reality. What I recognized him from was something older than visual memory, something that felt like recognition in the cells. He was a man from the ancient Mediterranean world, olive-skinned and dark-eyed and present in the way that very few people are present, entirely, without any part of him elsewhere. He looked at me the way someone looks when they know everything about you and have decided that love is the only appropriate response. I fell to my knees. I don't remember deciding to. Miriam, he said. He said my name with the weight of someone who had always known it. I had questions. 40 years of questions, stacked behind each other like freight cars, but only one came out. Do they know I miss them? He sat beside me, or the space rearranged itself so that we were sitting, which is closer to the truth, and he looked at me with the full weight of his attention. Every moment, he said, they are more aware of you than you know. And then he told me things, and I will tell you what he told me, in order, because the order matters. The first thing he told me is that recognition is not only preserved after death, it is expanded. That Theodora knows me more completely now than she ever did when she was alive. That death does not erase the record of love. It clarifies it. He told me that Caius remembers every Sunday phone call, not as a faded impression, but with a vividness that exceeds how we remember things here. Because memory in that place is not stored and retrieved, but simply present. He told me that Aldrich still exists in the completeness of who he was, his quietness, his notes, his particular way of watching a sunset, that personality is not a product of the brain that disappears with the brain, but something more fundamental that the brain merely expressed. I was crying. I am not someone who cries in front of others. I could not help it. But then he paused, and I felt the conversation shift the way weather shifts. The second thing he said is harder. I told him I wanted to hear it anyway. He told me that not everyone is there, that the same freedom that makes love meaningful makes rejection possible, and that some people exercise that freedom against him until the very end, and that he respects those choices with a sorrow that I could feel coming off him like heat. He told me that love cannot be installed in someone who refuses it, that heaven is not a place people are assigned to, it is a relationship people enter, and that a relationship requires two willing parties. I thought of my father, Wendell, who had died when I was 50, and who had spent his entire life treating religion as a mildly amusing delusion of weaker minds. Brilliant man, difficult man, funny and cold in alternating currents, who had looked at me across a dinner table once when I mentioned faith and said, with genuine affection, "Miri, you're too smart for that." I couldn't ask the question directly. I just looked at Jesus. He looked back at me with the most precise sorrow I have ever witnessed. Some of the people you love are not here, he said, and that is real, and it is not something I will soften for you. I asked him how heaven could be whole if it contains that knowledge, how joy could be complete while carrying the shape of an absence. He was quiet for a moment, in a way that felt like he was giving me time to understand something, rather than waiting to answer. He said, "In this place, you will understand my justice the way you understand mathematics, not as a belief, but as a self-evident reality. You will see every chance that was offered and every refusal that was made, and you will understand that love without freedom is not love, and that I pursued every person to the last possible moment, and that some of them turned away from me as a deliberate and sustained choice. You will grieve what was lost, but you will trust completely that nothing was wasted that could have been saved." That is not a comfortable answer. I want to be honest with you about that. It did not resolve the grief so much as it recontextualized it. There is a difference. Then he showed me something. He didn't describe it. He showed it to me the way you show someone a view, by standing beside them and not saying anything. I saw reunions, not the theatrical, orchestrated kind, the real kind, which are often quiet and involve people standing very still and looking at each other as though trying to confirm something they had been afraid to hope for. I watched a man I didn't recognize find a woman I didn't recognize, and I understood without being told that they had been father and daughter and had not seen each other in decades. And the way they looked at each other was the same across the boundary of death as it would have been across a room. Specific, particular, unmistakable recognition. I watched a young woman find an older woman and call her by a name I couldn't hear, but that made the older woman's face collapse into pure relief. I understood that the young woman had died first, decades before, and had waited, and that the waiting had not diminished her one particle. "What happens to the love while they wait?" I asked. "It doesn't wait," he said. "It grows." I asked him about the relationships themselves, whether they transformed, whether the specific texture of what I'd had with Aldrich, the notes and the Sunday silences, and the 41 years of accumulated shorthand, whether any of that survived. He said, "What you had with Aldrich is not erased. It is the foundation of something larger. Marriage as you knew it was a container appropriate to the conditions of earthly life. In the same way that a seedling needs a particular kind of shelter to become what it's going to become, and then outgrows that shelter without losing what grew inside it. What you built with Aldrich is real, and it is remembered by both of you, and it will be the beginning of something that has no ceiling." I tried to hold on to that. I'm still trying to hold on to it. He told me one more thing before he sent me back, and this is the part I think about most. He said, "The people who are still alive, go back and tell them that the distance between now and eternity is shorter than they think. Not as a threat, as information. Because the single most consequential decision a person makes is whether they come toward me or away from me. And most people treat it as something they'll get to eventually, the way you treat a phone call you keep meaning to return. There is no eventually. There is only now, accumulating until it stops." I thought about the people I knew who were still living and had never seriously considered this. People I loved. I thought about a conversation I'd been meaning to have with my daughter Vesper for 3 years, always finding a reason to delay it because the timing never seemed right. "Tell them," he said, "not to frighten them, because you love them, and love tells the truth." And then I was back. The return was the opposite of the departure, abrupt, jarring, my body suddenly a fact I had forgotten about and found poorly fitted. The parking lot, the November sky, Gertrude's voice, pain in my chest, oxygen. They told me afterward that Gertrude had kept me alive long enough, that the paramedics arrived within 4 minutes, that the 11 minutes and 43 seconds of clinical death should have left me with significant cognitive impairment, and that the neurologist who reviewed my scans used the word inexplicable twice in a single sentence. I spent 9 days in the hospital. I told everyone who would listen. Most of them were kind about it. A few believed me immediately. Some smiled with the specific warmth people use to manage the aged and confused. I didn't mind. I knew what I had seen. Evidence doesn't lose its quality because witnesses don't believe it. I'm telling you now because Jesus asked me to, and because I think some of you are exactly where I was for 40 years. Carrying losses you don't know how to put down, asking questions you've been told can't have answers, living around a wound that you've learned to treat as permanent. It is not permanent. The separation is real, and it is painful, and it is not the end of the story. Your people who knew him, they are there, they are whole. They know you are still here. And they are not simply waiting, but actively present in a way that exceeds what they were able to be while they were alive. The love is not stored somewhere dormant. It is alive and growing, and will recognize you immediately when you arrive. But here is the terrifying part, and I will not sand the edges off of it because he didn't. Not everyone is there, this is true. And the difference between who is and who isn't is not about being good enough or smart enough or religious enough in the right denomination. It is about this one question. Have you turned toward him or away from him? That is the entire thing. That is the whole of it. And you have exactly as long to answer it as you have left to breathe. I am 70 years old. My heart is structurally compromised, and my cardiologist has given me instructions I follow more carefully than I have ever followed instructions before. I am not afraid of dying. I was afraid for 40 years, and I am not afraid anymore, because I know what's on the other side, and I know who is there. My mother, who called me Miri, my brother Caius, who called every Sunday, my husband Aldrich, who left notes in coat pockets, and who has apparently, according to the one person in the universe qualified to know, been watching me find them. I am going to see them. I am certain of this the way I am certain of tides. But before I do, I am going to spend whatever time I have left making sure the people I love understand what is at stake and what is available to them, and that the decision they keep meaning to make is one they should make today, now, before the parking lot becomes their parking lot. Heaven is real. So is the alternative. And between where you are now and where you will eventually be, there is a single question that will determine everything. He is asking it. He has always been asking it. And the only answer that leads home is yes.